Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Gardener. And thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's January 15th. Today we celebrate living virtually. We can tour one of the world's greatest museums, which opened on this day in 1759. We'll learn about a man who endeared himself to his countrymen when he published a book about the plant life found within 16 miles of his hometown. We'll hear some thoughts on identifying wildlife in the winter garden. And we grow that garden library today with a beautiful book that's full of incredible wisdom from a seasoned gardener and stylist. And then we'll wrap things up with the story of a woman who wrote about her garden and called herself the commuter's wife. Now, before we get to all of that, I wanted to take a quick second to tell you about two ways that you can connect with the show. The first one is a website called Podchaser. And if you head on over to Podchaser, you'll notice it's a brand new podcast directory. And it's set up to help you make finding and reviewing podcasts easier than ever. In fact, if you like a particular episode, you can even rate an individual episode as opposed to rating an entire program. So that's a cool new feature. And you can find the Daily Gardener on Podchaser. And if you do, I would absolutely love it if you could take a few moments and leave a review for the show. Compared to so many other podcasts out there, I think the Daily Gardener has a little bit of catching up to do. I think we have about 10 reviews, and I'd like to see that number grow just a little bit more in the hopes that people who like botanical history, botanical literature, and just gardening in general can hopefully find the show. So if you love the show, I would really appreciate a review from you, and you can do that over at podchaser.com. Next, I'd like to encourage you to sign up for the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. It's a fun little email that you can receive from me every Friday. And it's a lovely way for me to connect with you, the listeners of the show. So I try to make the newsletter like you're getting a little note from a garden friend. I share what's going on in my garden world, along with fun ideas and products that I'm excited about, as well as many of the kind of things that I talk about on the show during the week, like botanical history and literature. So if you'd like to get a little garden note from me on Fridays, just head on over to the website for the show, thedailygardener.org, and sign up for the free Friday newsletter today. It's time for today's curated news. Today's article was written by Les Ingalls, and it's called How to Grow and Care for Spirea Shrubs. This post was featured over on the spruce. As Les points out, the Spirea is invaluable ornamentally, but it's also a marvelous plant ecologically speaking because it feeds numerous pollinators. It's a butterfly and moth lover's delight since the flowers are hosts to the fluttering insects while they're in bloom. That said, as Les points out, the Spirea is not deer resistant. You may think that it is, but occasionally, as a last resort, deer will eat Spirea. Now, one of the things that I appreciate about Les's post is that he points out the popular Spirea varieties. I remember one time I was at a garden tour and I heard a woman say she didn't like Spirea. And then, of course, the next thing you know, she's asking about a plant that she saw that she liked. And here it was another variety of Spirea. So you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are a lot of different options. Now, if you'd like to read Les's article for yourself, just search for the word Spirea in the Facebook group for the show, and Les's post will pop right up. I try to make it super easy for you to follow up on all of the articles that I curate for the show. And if you're not in the group, it's completely free and easy to join. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. It was on this day, January 19th, in 1759, that the British Museum opened. The British Museum was founded in 1753 when Sir Hans Sloane left his entire collection to the country of England. You know, at first glance, a personal collection doesn't really sound worthy of starting a museum. But over his lifetime, Hans ended up becoming a one-person repository for all things relating to the natural world. Hans outlived many of the explorers and collectors of his day, and as they would die, they would bequeath him their herbariums and collections. So when Hans passed away, he had practically become the caretaker of the world's natural history, the beginning of the British Museum. Today, the British Museum is the largest indoor space captured by Google Street View. Google mapped the entire museum in November of 2015, and now it's available online to all of us. And I just tootled around there yesterday, so it's fantastic. So today, if somebody asks you what you're doing, you can say, I'm going to tour the British Museum. What are you up to? And today is the birthday of the British shoemaker and amateur botanist Richard Buxton, who was born on this day, January 15th, in 1786. Born into poverty in Lancashire, as a young boy, Richard enjoyed picking his favorite wildflowers, Germander speedwell, creeping tormentil or cinquefoil, and common chickweed. Now, although it has pretty deep blue flowers, I think it's a little funny that Richard picked Germander speedwell or Veronica camidris because the blossoms wilt quickly after picking or cutting them, which is how it got the ironic common name Männertreu in German. Männertreu means men's faithfulness. And as for creeping tormentil or cinquefoil, Potentilla reptans, today that plant is considered a lawnweed. The clue to the medicinal power of this invasive plant is in its name, Potentilla, which means powerful despite its small size. It was regarded as a powerful and versatile herbal medicinal plant. Finally, all the species of chickweed are in the genus Stellaria, and if you look closely, the little chickweed blossoms resemble carnation flowers, which makes sense because chickweed is actually a member of the carnation family, Caryophyllaceae. Now, before we keep going with Richard, I have to tell you another great thing to know about chickweed. It's a great plant to eat. I think of it as a spinach substitute. It's nutritious and delicious. And if you're wondering what it tastes like, it's often compared to corn silk. Now, as for Richard, he was industrious, and he taught himself to read when he was 16. And he accomplished this Herculean task with 2 books, the Common Spelling Book and Jones Pronouncing Dictionary. And by the age of 18, Richard became an apprentice to a shoemaker and an amateur botanist named James Heap. Together, James and Richard would botanize the countryside, looking for herbs to make drinks. After realizing a reference book would help with their foraging, Richard bought a copy of Culpepper's Complete Herbal. And when Culpepper wasn't practical enough or accurate enough, Richard purchased Myrick's Herbal. And for Richard, both of these books ended up starting a lifelong pursuit for botanical knowledge. He read as much as he could. As a gardener, if you struggle with taking cuttings from your garden, you'll identify with Richard, because although most botanists collect specimens, dry them, and then mount them, Richard couldn't bear to cut the specimens that he found in nature. Instead, Richard made all of his botanical discoveries by observing living plants and then taking notes. In 1849, when Richard was 62 years old, he endeared himself to his countrymen when he published a book called A Botanical Guide to the Flowering Plants, Ferns, Mosses, and Alga found indigenous within 16 miles of Manchester. Richard's obituary in the Preston Chronicle and Lancashire Advisor said, "This extraordinary self-taught man died at his residence after a very short illness in the 81st year of his age." It is now nearly 20 years since Mr. Buxton, then a maker of children's shoes, wrote his botanical guide. In that book, in an exciting account of himself, Richard said, "I have now reached the age of 62 years, and although by no means robust, I can yet make a ramble of 30 miles a day and enjoy the beauties of nature with as much zest as I ever did in my life." True, the pursuit of botany has not yielded me much money, but what in my opinion is far better, it has preserved my health, if not my life, and afforded me a fair share of happiness. Mr. Buxton was probably the best British botanist that Lancashire has produced, and he has been called by one of the most eminent living authorities a complete dictionary of English botany. Well, Richard was a pauper all of his life, and as he grew older, Richard's friends and fellow naturalists ended up encouraging the community to help Richard by buying his book. And the geologist Edward William Binney set up a fund for Richard and ultimately ended up paying for Richard's tombstone when he died at the age of 81. And in 1914, The Guardian shared that members of a Manchester nature club were going to try to ascertain just how many of the 40 plants mentioned by Richard Buxton in his book still existed. There was no word on the results of that endeavor. In Unearthed Words, today's words are by Beth Chatto from her garden notebook for her chapter on January. The first thing I noticed as I watched my own boots sink below the blue shadowed surface were the footprints of many other occupants of the garden. The mallard duck had left their heavy, plodding trails before flying off, hopefully to some place where the water is not totally frozen over, probably to the salt marshes, which are not far away. The large webless prints of moorhens, setting off in determined straight lines, were everywhere. Blackbirds, thrushes, robins, and jackdaws were evident in a confused jumble of prints all around the house and buildings. I wish I could identify more of the strange little footprints to be found in the snow. However, It is not difficult to recognize rabbits' long feet crisscrossing an area we call the wilderness, my last 2 acres of uncultivated land, which is wired off from the garden with rabbit-proof netting. Here, too, I saw the prints of a fox, together with a continuous hollow scraped in the soft snow. It was easy to imagine him dragging his kill back to some hideaway. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, A Year at Brandywine College by David Culp. This book came out in 2020, and the subtitle is 6 Seasons of Beauty, Bounty, and Blooms. And this book is one of my favorites from last year. In this book, David Culp shares a year at his Brandywine cottage and generously shares how to enrich your life with the natural world, even if it's just in your own backyard. David's book is organized seasonally and offers a smorgasbord of flower gardening, veggie and herb gardening, floral arranging, and cooking with homegrown produce. He offers a little bit of everything. David provides monthly tips and advice to help you experience year-round success and joy. And best of all, David's shared wisdom is practical and creative, and all of them are gems of conciseness and are based on his 30 years of experience. This book is 296 pages of David Culp's extraordinary life in and out of the garden at Brandywine Cottage. It's an inspiring read for gardeners and for anyone who finds the natural world an enriching and joyful part of life. You can get a copy of A Year at Brandywine Cottage by David Culp and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $13. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. It was on this day, January 15th, in 1906, that the Nashville Banner ran a story about revealing a prolific author and nature lover's true identity. It said, "The authorship of the popular book, The Garden of a Commuter's Wife, has been jealously guarded in this country. But it can be positively stated, however, that the book was written by Mabel Osgood Wright. Her authorship will be announced by the Macmillan Company on the publication of a new book in the series The Garden, You and I." A New Yorker, Mabel Osgood Wright was the leader of the Audubon movement, a photographer, a conservationist, a native plant advocate, and an American author who wrote about gardens, nature, and birds. A nature writer, Mabel started out by submitting pieces to the New York Times and other newspapers. A decade later, she collected her articles and put them in a book called The Friendship of Nature. After her first book, Mabel produced one book every year until 1911. And some of her more famous works include Birdcraft, which came out in 1895, and Flowers and Ferns in Their Haunts, which was released in 1901. Mabel had a gift for writing about nature and natural sciences in a way that was relatable and struck a chord with her readers. And as a talented photographer, Mabel took most of the photographs for her books. And as the article that I shared earlier indicated, Mabel published her best-selling book, The Garden of a Commuter's Wife, in 1901 and its sequels under the pseudonym Barbara. In Mabel's book, The Garden of a Commuter's Wife, the gardener was Mabel, and the commuter was her husband, James. Mabel dedicated her book and her garden to him. Mabel was opposed to the massacre of birds to decorate women's hats. In Connecticut, Mabel created the first private bird sanctuary in the country. The sanctuary, named Birdcraft, was Mabel's design. And today, the 6-acre Birdcraft Sanctuary is open daily, year-round, from dawn to dusk. And Mabel's beautiful Connecticut country home and garden gave her plenty of material for her books. It was Mabel Osgood Wright who said, "Let everyone who makes garden plans frequently insert the letters CP after them as a reminder for climate permitting." Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.